Hello and welcome to the Cheeky Science Show. So in a previous video, I said that I was planning to read the book Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to by David Sinclair. And guess what? I read it. So in this video, I'll give my thoughts and opinions and a general overview to the book. So all in all, I really enjoyed reading it, and I think the book is very accessible to those who have both a science background and a non-science background. The book also addresses many current issues and also informs on the status that we're at with understanding lifespan and healthspan in humans. So the book is called Lifespan, though it could quite easily be also called Healthspan, since it discusses in quite a lot of detail the science behind what regulates and could be modified to extend a health span, but also it looks at the societal impacts, which is also a topic of conversation that really does need to be spread. So the first subheading of the book is Why We Age, and so I've made several videos before about the different hallmarks of aging, but what I really liked about this book is that David, from all of his years of research, has provided his own idea about what comes before these hallmarks of aging, and he describes this all in his informational theory of aging. And one of the key messages that David Sinclair likes to make in this book is that aging is quite simply loss of information. And interestingly, this information theory of aging by David is based upon the mathematical theory of communication by Claude Shannon. And to make this point clear, you need to understand that there are two ways of transmitting information, digital and analog. One of the main differences being that analog information is continuous, whilst digital is discrete. The problem with analog information, however, is that it can get disrupted by noise. And so David makes the point that we have both analog and digital information within each of our cells, the digital information being our genetic code, whereas the analog information being the epigenetic code that determines and dictates the gene expression levels and how different regions of DNA is compacted within the cell. And so based upon Claude Shannon's work, we know that it's analog information that is prone to the accumulation of noise and disruption over time. And so if this is the epigenetic information, then this epigenetic information can also accumulate noise over time, and this results in a loss of information, which David summarises as being the key reason behind the aging process. So I really like how David uses this theory of communication as a framework on which to build the idea of how we age, because aging is very complicated and this provides a simpler way of understanding the process. But to use another analogy from the book, it's like a DVD, whereby the digital information is recorded on the DVD, but the DVD surface could get scratched, and that scratching of the surface, this analog information, can disrupt the reading of the digital information encoded on the DVD. So we've discussed what aging is. The next part of the book looks at, is it possible to prevent or even to reverse this aging process? So the next part of the book takes us much more into the science behind the aging process, built upon work from not only David's lab, but from other labs as well. And so, to be quite blunt, he suggests that there are three main ways that you can do to try and prevent or slow down the aging process. One is to eat less. So what this effectively is calorie restriction, and so I've made a video before in this, which I'll link up the top for you. And so how this relates to the aging process is you can try and think of it as having normal biology and how just, the way cells are, you can accumulate damage within proteins, within the different lipids and within DNA itself, and also the epigenetics, as we've already discussed. And so if you have high nutrient signaling, you kind of promote this, you have an increased rate of this normal biology process, which just increases the rate of damage. So the idea is that calorie restriction could reduce the amount of damage induced within the cell, but also activate processes that can help to reverse the damage that's accumulated. So conceptually, this can be quite a hard topic to get your head around, but David describes it in his book with such simplicity, as well as backing it up with evidence from research from his lab and from other labs as well. I also appreciate how he tries to share the science without enforcing any opinions over how exactly you should be doing any of this. But if you are interested in calorie restriction in humans, then you should definitely check out my video where I discussed this recent paper where they had a 2-year study looking at the effects that calorie restriction had. But anyway, back to the book review. The next stage of the book is to look at what process is involved with calorie restriction, but also looking at the molecules out there that can mimic this restriction process, and looking at molecules that can target these different proteins. So the different molecular pathways that I'm drawing out here are often referred to as the nutrient signalling pathways. And so if they're unfamiliar to you at the moment, don't worry, the book does explain them in quite a lot of detail. I'm just summarising it here. But the key point I'm trying to make is that there are different molecules that can target different proteins within these pathways to modulate the signalling through the pathway. At least based on current research, that's what we think they're doing. So the different molecules discussed in the book include rapamycin, metformin, resveratrol, and NAD precursors. And the idea is that you want to be able to promote the stress-resistant signalling and to prevent the growth signalling, to prevent or slow down aging. And in a way, this should mimic calorie restriction. So one molecule discussed in great depth is metformin, which you may already be taking because it's a type 2 diabetes drug. But now, as you'll learn from the book, metformin is being tested to see if it can actually target aging itself. And so this targeting aging with metformin is a trial that recently started, and it's trying to look to see if metformin can delay the onset of age-related diseases. The problem is that this is a really good step forward, but currently aging still isn't recognised as a disease. So if there is a link between metformin and preventing aging, you would have to be prescribed the drug. So you'd have like type 2 diabetes. At least that's how I think it works. But some of the other molecules discussed, you can already have access to, the second one being resveratrol. So resveratrol is thought to prevent the aging process by activating sirtuins, and resveratrol can be found in, amongst things, grapes, and also in red wine. But as you'll learn in the book, to get the same dose of resveratrol as has been used in experimental studies, you would have to drink a lot of wine. And the last set of molecules that from experimental studies seem to slow the aging process are NAD precursors, one of which is NMN, or otherwise known as nicotinamide mononucleotide. And so NAD precursors you can buy from different companies and people are taking them. However, some of them can be quite costly. And it is yet to be scientifically proven that they have an impact in humans. However, I really did enjoy the story that David gives of his own father who started taking NMN and just had this like rejuvenation of life come back to him, which I thought was quite an inspiring and interesting story. And it really adds a personal element to the book, which I really enjoyed. Like resveratrol though, NMN can also come through your diet. It's found in broccoli, cucumber, avocado, tomatoes and edamame. However, as with resveratrol, you need to eat a lot of broccoli to get the dose of NMN that matches what you can take with supplements. So the second way to prevent aging is to exercise more, which is discussed in more detail in the book, but it also is thought to act through activating these stress resistance pathways within a cell. And lastly, it's to go outside the thermoneutral zone, so temperatures above and below what our bodies are comfortable with. So exactly how going for a walk in the cold can help prevent the aging process is not entirely clear yet, but again it's thought to activate these stress resistant pathways. But I did learn from the book that it's not sauna, it's sauna. But like David says, I think I'm also going to stick with sauna. So as the book explains, we've come a long way in understanding the aging process, but there are still some key aspects to the aging process that we are yet to fully understand. And David explains this again by building upon Claude Shannon's theory, his mathematical theory of communication, and how you can recover lost information that's lost in the analogue signalling process through noise accumulation. So David explains, using this principle, that there are three key aspects that we need to identify to be able to recover the information lost during aging. So one, we need to identify what the observer is that recognises the original signal. We then need to know where the correction data is stored, and also what is the correcting device that seems to be able to reverse and remove the noise from the signal to get you back the original signal. So in addition to the advances made in science that you'll learn about in the book, you'll also learn about the technological advances that have also occurred, one of which is biometric tracking or biotracking. So this part of the book reminded me a lot of what I read in Eric Topol's most recent book, Deep Medicine, for which I also did a book review that I'll link up the top for you. But in a similar way to Biotracking, he talks about virtual medical assistants, which are kind of things you could have on your phone that could inform you of all your different biometrics, how much you've slept, how your composition of your blood is doing, what foods you should be taking, etc. And that is definitely seems to be the way that technology is going in this direction. And so they could really get early indications of which diseases you're likely to get. And there's a lot of information you can even get from just phone usage. But what all this bio-tracking technology really reminds me of is a quote I read from Yuval Noah Harari's book Homo Deus, which is that the 20th century medicine was all about healing the sick, but now it's about upgrading the health. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The concern is whether those who get this additional health are also the ones that have the wealth to afford the health. And so David correctly asks this question in this book: how will we extend human health span with equity, equality, and human decency? Because, as David says, unless aging is recognised as a disease, once we know that some of these supplements actually do have an effect at preventing aging, they will only be available to those who can afford them, because they won't just be prescribed because you've got aging and that's a disease. And so what happens if those who have the wealth to afford these supplements, they get better health, they then have more time to make more wealth, and then they have more wealth to be able to afford even more supplements, and so it's just a perpetual cycle. And the idea is, how can we avoid this from happening? And so that's one problem that David addresses well. But the second one is the fear that a lot of people have about overpopulation, which David also addresses very well, but also talks about it in terms of, instead of overpopulation, it's about our overuse of consumption. And so the message isn't all doom and gloom, but David does really reinforce the point that we need to be spreading this message and just having these conversations now before it's too late. So yes, I really do like how this book addresses both the science and societal impacts. And the book is so current. I mean, it was only last year that WHO recognised old age in the International Classification of Diseases. And if you need another reason, there's also a lovely quote from Winnie the Pooh, which is when he asks, "What day is it?" And Piglet replies, "It's today." And Winnie the Pooh goes, "My favourite day." I love that quote. So I hope this video has given you a good overview of what the book is about, but as you can see, the book is big and there is much more to read than I can say in a 12-minute summary. So go read the book, and I just want to say thanks to David for such an insightful book. So as always, thanks for listening.